It was 11:42 p.m. on a Friday in November 2018 when Officer Dan Miller of the Glenview Police Department kicked open the front door of a pristine two-story colonial house on Elm Street. He had been called there by a silent 911 call, a call where no one spoke, but the dispatcher could hear screaming in the background before the line went dead. Officer Miller had his gun drawn as he moved into the foyer. The house was eerily quiet now. The screaming had stopped. The only sound was the hum of the central heating and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Miller moved slowly, sweeping the barrel of his gun from left to right, checking the corners. The house looked normal. Family photos on the wall, shoes neatly lined up by the mat, a coat rack with winter jackets. But when Officer Miller turned the corner into the living room, the normalcy shattered. In the center of the room, sitting on a coffee table, was a Monopoly board. The game was clearly in mid-play. There were little metal tokens scattered on the property squares, hotels on the boardwalk, piles of colorful paper money, and a bowl of popcorn that had been knocked over, spilling kernels onto the expensive Persian rug. But the board itself was ruined, splashed across the properties, across the chance cards, and across the luxury tax square was a massive amount of bright red arterial blood. Officer Miller lowered his weapon slightly, his eyes scanning the rest of the room, seeing the bodies slumped on the sofas and the floor, and he realized that the game had not ended because someone won. The game had ended because someone had walked in and turned a Friday night tradition into a slaughterhouse. This story sounds like a cautionary tale your parents tell you to make sure you lock your doors at night, but it is 100% true, and it serves as a terrifying reminder that the barrier between a happy life and a total nightmare is often just a thin piece of wood and a simple metal lock. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place, because that is all we do, and we upload very often, so if that is of interest to you, please invite the like button over for a friendly game of Monopoly, but insist on playing by house rules where you start with all the money and the like button starts directly in jail without passing go. Also, please subscribe to the Cypher Story on YouTube so you do not miss any of weekly uploads. Okay, let us get into today's story. The Harrison family was the definition of the American dream, living in the quiet, upscale suburb of Glenview, Illinois. The father, 45-year-old Mark Harrison, was a successful architect who had actually designed their beautiful home himself. He was a tall, gentle man who coached Little League and was known for his distinct laugh that you could hear from 3 houses away. The mother, 43-year-old Sarah Harrison, was a high school history teacher who was beloved by her students. She was the kind of person who baked cookies for the neighbors and organized the block party every summer. Together, they had 2 children, 16-year-old Jessica and 14-year-old Tyler. Jessica was a straight-A student who played the violin and was hoping to get into Stanford. Tyler was the athlete of the family, a star soccer player who was obsessed with video games and teasing his older sister. Despite the usual teenage angst and the occasional bickering over chores, the Harrisons were an incredibly tight-knit unit. They genuinely liked hanging out with each other, which is rare for families with teenagers. They had a strict rule that Sarah had implemented years ago: no phones at the dinner table, and every Friday night was mandatory family game night. It didn't matter how busy Mark was at work, or how much homework Jessica had, or what party Tyler wanted to go to Friday night. From 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. was reserved for the 4 of them. They would order pizzas, usually from Antonio's, the local spot, and they would rotate who got to pick the game. Sometimes it was Scrabble, sometimes it was Clue, but on this particular night, November 16, 2018, it was Mark's turn to pick, and Mark always picked Monopoly. Mark loved Monopoly. He was ruthlessly competitive at it, which was funny because in real life, he was such a gentle guy. But put a thimble token in his hand and give him some fake money, and he turned into a corporate shark. He loved buying the railroads and the utilities, and he loved driving his kids into simulated bankruptcy, jokingly demanding rent whenever they landed on his properties. It was a running gag in the family that Dad was a Monopoly tyrant. The night started off perfectly. It was a cold, rainy night in Illinois, the kind of weather that makes being inside feel extra cozy. The wind was whipping the rain against the windows, creating a rhythmic drumming sound that added to the atmosphere. Mark had built a fire in the fireplace, and the living room was glowing with warmth. The family had demolished 2 large pepperoni pizzas, and the game was in full swing. Tyler was currently winning, having secured the green properties and built houses on them. Jessica was struggling, low on cash, and trying to negotiate a trade with her mom. Sarah was just happy to be there, sipping a glass of wine and laughing as Mark pretended to be outraged that he had to pay a luxury tax. The vibe in the room was pure joy. It was safe, it was warm, and it was full of love. At around 9:15 p.m., the rain outside intensified, turning into a heavy downpour. Mark stood up to put another log on the fire, joking that Tyler was cheating because nobody gets lucky enough to roll doubles 3 times in a row without rigging the dice. Everyone laughed. Sarah told Mark to sit down and stop being a sore loser. What none of them realized was that while they were laughing and arguing over Boardwalk and Park Place, someone was standing outside on their front porch watching them. The Harrisons lived in a very safe neighborhood, the kind of neighborhood where people leave their garage doors open and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. Crime was basically non-existent in Glenview. Maybe a mailbox got smashed by teenagers once a year, or a package got stolen off a porch, but violent crime was unheard of. Because of this feeling of safety, the Harrisons, like many of their neighbors, had a bad habit. They often left their front door unlocked until they went to bed. On this specific night, Mark had come home from work at 6 p.m., carrying his briefcase and the pizzas he had ordered. He had walked through the front door, kicked it shut with his heel, and walked into the kitchen. But the latch hadn't fully engaged. The deadbolt was not thrown. The heavy oak door was closed, so it looked locked, but it was essentially just resting in the frame, secure against the wind, but not against a person. Standing on the porch in the pouring rain was a man named Randall Smith. Randall was 29 years old, a drifter who had arrived in Glenview earlier that day by hitchhiking off the interstate. He had no connection to the Harrison family. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know Mark was an architect or that Sarah was a teacher. He didn't know their names. Randall was suffering from severe, untreated paranoid schizophrenia, and he had been off his medication for months. In his delusional state, Randall believed that he was being hunted by shadow agents and that he needed to find sanctuary to hide from the storm and the voices in his head. To Randall, the Harrison house wasn't a home. It was a fortress glowing with golden light. Looking through the bay window in the living room, he could see the fire. He could see the people moving around, but his brain distorted the image. He didn't see a family playing a game. He saw agents guarding a safe house. He stood there for 10 minutes, soaking wet, shivering, the water dripping off his matted hair and dirty army jacket, staring at the Harrisons with a blank, expressionless gaze. Inside the house, Jessica rolled the dice. 7. She counted out the spaces with her metal dog token. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. "Oh, come on, Dad." She had landed on Mark's hotel on Marvin Gardens. Mark let out a triumphant cheer. "Pay up, Jess. Rent is due." Sarah laughed. "Mark, go easy on her. She is your daughter." "No mercy in Monopoly," Mark grinned, holding out his hand for the fake cash. Just as Jessica was reaching for her stack of money, the sound of the front door handle turning cut through the laughter. It was a distinct metallic click, followed by the squeak of the hinges. Everyone in the room froze. Mark turned his head towards the hallway, confused. He wasn't expecting anyone. "Did we order dessert?" Tyler asked innocently, thinking maybe they ordered more food. "Shh," Mark said, his smile fading. He stood up slowly. "Hello?" he called out towards the foyer. "Is someone there?" The family listened. Usually, if it was a neighbor or a friend, they would yell out, "Hey, it's just me!" But there was no voice, just the sound of heavy, wet boots stepping onto the hardwood floor. Thump, squish, thump, squish. Mark looked at Sarah, and for the first time that night, Sarah saw fear in her husband's eyes. Mark signaled for the kids to stay on the couch, and he walked out of the living room into the hallway. "Hey, "Who is this?" Mark said, his voice firmer now, trying to project authority. "You are in the wrong house, pal. You need to leave." From the living room, Sarah, Jessica, and Tyler couldn't see the front door. They could only see Mark's back as he stood at the end of the hallway, blocking the view. Suddenly, Mark took a step back, his hands going up in a defensive posture. "Whoa, okay, just take it easy, man. We don't have anything. Just turn around and go." A voice drifted into the living room, a voice that sounded flat and devoid of any emotion, like a computer synthesis. "Sanctuary," the voice said. "I require sanctuary." "Look, you can't be here," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "My family is here. Please, just leave." Then there was a sound that no one in that family would ever forget. The sound of a serrated hunting knife being pulled from a leather sheath. Shing! Mark screamed, "Run, Sarah! Run! Get the kids upstairs!" Chaos erupted. Sarah lunged from the couch, grabbing Tyler by the shirt. Jessica screamed, scrambling backward over the coffee table, knocking the Monopoly board onto the floor, sending the hotels and money flying into the air. Mark charged forward, trying to tackle the intruder to buy his family time. Mark was a big guy, but he was an architect, not a fighter, and Randall Smith was fueled by adrenaline and psychosis. The two men collided in the hallway with a sickening thud. Mark managed to grab Randall's wrist, trying to control the knife, but Randall was impossibly strong. He headbutted Mark in the face, shattering Mark's nose and blinding him with tears and blood. Mark fell back, stunned, and Randall stepped over him, entering the living room. The firelight danced on the blade of the knife, which was 6 inches long and rusted near the handle. Randall didn't look angry. He looked confused, almost like he was sleepwalking. He looked at the scattered Monopoly money on the floor, then at Sarah, who was pushing the kids towards the back stairs that led to the kitchen. "No agents," Randall mumbled. "No witnesses." Randall moved with terrifying speed for a man in heavy boots. He bypassed Mark, who was trying to crawl to his feet, and lunged at Sarah. She turned to shield her children, putting her back to the attacker. Randall stabbed her twice in the shoulder and back. She screamed, collapsing right next to the fireplace. "Mom!" Tyler screamed, freezing in terror, looking at his mother bleeding on the rug. Jessica had made it to the kitchen doorway, but when she heard Tyler scream, she stopped. She couldn't leave her brother. She turned around and saw the man standing over her mother, raising the knife again. Mark Harrison, fueled by the primal rage of a father seeing his wife hurt, launched himself from the hallway, tackling Randall from behind, wrapping his arm around the intruder's neck. "Get out, Tyler! Jessica, get out now!" Mark roared, spitting blood. Tyler grabbed Jessica's hand, and they sprinted into the kitchen. Tyler fumbled for the back door, which led to the patio, but in their panic, they struggled with the chain lock. Behind them, in the living room, they could hear the sounds of a brutal life-and-death struggle, furniture smashing, glass breaking, and the guttural grunts of their father fighting for his life. Finally, Tyler got the back door open, and the cold rain hit their faces. They ran out into the dark backyard, slipping on the wet grass. They didn't stop. They ran to the fence, hopped it, and sprinted to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door, screaming for help. Back inside the house, the living room had gone quiet. The neighbors, Bob and Linda Davis, were watching TV when they heard the frantic pounding on their back sliding glass door. At first, they thought it was the storm, but then they heard the screaming. They rushed to the door and pulled back the curtains to see Tyler and Jessica Harrison, soaking wet, covered in mud and shivering violently, their eyes wide with absolute terror. Bob unlocked the door, and the kids practically fell inside, gasping for air, unable to form coherent sentences. All they could get out was, "Man, knife, Dad, blood." Bob Davis immediately grabbed his phone and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that there was an emergency at the Harrison house next door and that the children were at his house, safe. While Linda wrapped the kids in blankets, trying to calm them, the police were dispatched immediately. This brings us back to Officer Dan Miller entering the Harrison home just minutes later. Officer Miller, having seen the carnage in the living room, knew he had to clear the rest of the house. He stepped over the ruined Monopoly board, his boots crunching on the scattered plastic houses and hotels. He moved towards the kitchen, the gun tight in his grip, his heart pounding against his ribs. The house was silent again. The struggle was over. Officer Miller approached the kitchen doorway. The swing door was pushed open slightly, and he could see a light on inside. He took a deep breath and swung around the frame, weapon raised, yelling, "Police department, show me your hands!" The sight in the kitchen was something that would haunt Officer Miller for the rest of his career. Sitting at the seemingly innocent kitchen table sat Randall Smith, the intruder. He was covered in blood, his army jacket soaked red, his hands stained crimson. But he wasn't holding a weapon anymore, and he wasn't trying to run. Randall was sitting there calmly, holding a slice of the Harrisons' cold pepperoni pizza in one hand, and in the other hand, he was clutching a fistful of the colorful Monopoly money. He was staring at the fake yellow $100 bill with a look of intense concentration, as if he was trying to calculate a tip. "Hands up! Drop the pizza!" Miller screamed. Randall looked up slowly, his eyes glassy and vacant. He took a bite of the pizza, chewed slowly, and then mumbled, "I bought the railroad. I own the station now. Sanctuary is paid for." Officer Miller didn't hesitate. He holstered his weapon and tackled Randall to the ground, cuffing him before the man could react. Randall didn't fight. He just went limp, muttering about agents and rent prices. Paramedics rushed into the house moments later, bypassing the kitchen to get to the living room. Tragically, for Mark Harrison, help had come too late. The brave father, who had designed the house to protect his family, had died on the living room floor, surrounded by the scattered pieces of the game he loved. He had sustained multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck, but his sacrifice had worked. He had held Randall off for exactly enough time for his children to get out that back door. Sarah Harrison was found unconscious near the fireplace, clinging to life. She had lost a massive amount of blood, but she had a pulse. Paramedics worked on her frantically, loading her onto a stretcher and rushing her to the nearest trauma center. She would undergo emergency surgery that lasted for 8 hours, and against all odds, Sarah Harrison survived. But she woke up to a world that was fundamentally broken. Her husband was gone, her sense of safety was obliterated, and her children were traumatized forever. The investigation into Randall Smith revealed the terrifying nature of random violence. Police found that Randall had simply been walking down the street, testing door handles. He had tried the door of the house 2 doors down, but it was locked. He had tried the house across the street, but they had a motion sensor light that scared him off. The Harrison house was simply the first one that opened. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It wasn't a targeted hit, it wasn't a robbery gone wrong, it was a crime of opportunity in its most brutal form. Randall told psychiatrists later that he didn't hate the Harrisons, he didn't even know them, he just thought they were blocking him from his safe zone. And when Mark confronted him, Randall's broken mind interpreted it as an act of war. The Monopoly murder, as the press dubbed it, sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Glenview. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts and security cameras within 48 hours. Neighbors who had known each other for years stopped waving and started closing their blinds as soon as the sun went down. The illusion of safety in suburbia had been shattered by a single unlocked door. Randall Smith was eventually found unfit to stand trial due to his severe schizophrenia. He was committed to a maximum security psychiatric facility for the criminally insane, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. But that is small comfort to Jessica and Tyler, who have to grow up without a father, or to Sarah, who has to walk past that living room every day, remembering the laughter that was cut short by the click of a latch. The Harrison family eventually moved out of the house Mark designed, unable to live in the place where the tragedy occurred. They moved to a smaller house in a different state, trying to start over, but they kept one tradition alive. Every Friday night, they order pizza and they sit together, but they don't play Monopoly anymore. They just sit and talk, grateful for every second they have together, because they know better than anyone how quickly it can all be taken away. This story is a brutal reminder of a very simple fact. We often feel safe in our homes because we are surrounded by our things, our family, and our routine. We think that because we are good people, bad things won't happen to us. But the world is chaotic and unpredictable. Locks exist for a reason. They are the only physical barrier between the warmth of your living room and the cold randomness of the outside world. So tonight, before you go to bed, go to your front door, turn the deadbolt, and listen for that click. It takes 1 second, but it might just be the most important thing you do all day. Thank you for listening to the Cipher Story. If you learned something from this story, please challenge the like button to a game of Twister, but cover the mat in superglue before you start. Also, please subscribe to the Cipher Story channel on YouTube. We are building a massive community of people who love the strange, dark, and mysterious, and we want you to be a part of it. If you have a story about a home invasion or a close call, please email it to me. I read everything, and I might feature your story in a future episode. Until next time, check your locks, hug your family, and stay safe. See ya!